Derek handed his wife the divorce papers in front of 300 people, then smiled for the cameras like he had just won an award. The gala hall went quiet. Waiters froze mid-step. Someone's champagne glass tipped over, and nobody moved to clean it. Grace stood there in the dress she had bought at a thrift store 6 years ago, the same dress she wore to the very first investor pitch that saved his company from collapse. She looked down at the folder in her hands. Her name was spelled wrong on the cover page. He hadn't even bothered to get it right. "I think it's time we both moved on," Derek said, loud enough for the room to hear. Grace gave this company a lot in the early days, but every company outgrows its old parts. Old parts. That's what he called her. 7 years of marriage. 7 years of late nights, of coding on a laptop with a cracked screen, of skipping meals so he could afford server costs, of sitting behind him in every meeting while he took the credit and she took the notes. 7 years reduced to 2 words spoken into a microphone at a party celebrating a merger she built with her own hands. She didn't cry. Not there. Not in front of the cameras. She simply nodded, set her champagne glass down on a waiter's tray, and walked out into the cold night air alone. But here's what nobody in that room knew. What Derek himself didn't know. In exactly 48 hours, he would be begging her to come back. Not for love, for survival. Let's go back to where this really started, because you need to understand what he threw away before you understand what happened next. 6 years earlier, Derek was a man with a big mouth and a small bank account. He had an idea for a logistics software company, the kind of idea that sounds brilliant in a coffee shop and falls apart the second you try to build it. Grace was the one who actually built it. She had studied computer science at a community college at night, while working 2 jobs during the day. She wrote the original code. She designed the algorithm that made deliveries faster and cheaper than anything else on the market. She stayed up until 4 in the morning fixing bugs while Derek slept, because he said founders needed their rest for big picture thinking. When investors came to look at the company, Derek stood at the front of the room in a suit Grace had saved up to buy him. She sat in the back, taking notes, answering technical questions only when he got stuck, and shot her a panicked look. Nobody asked her name. Nobody wrote it down. She didn't mind, not at first, because she believed they were building something together. She believed a husband and wife shared everything, including credit. She was wrong. As the company grew, so did Derek's appetite for attention. He started showing up in magazines. He started showing up at parties without her. He bought a watch that cost more than the car she used to drive to community college. And slowly, quietly, money that should have gone into their joint account started disappearing into private accounts, private jets, and private company of a different kind. Grace noticed. Of course she noticed. She was the one managing half the finances in the early years, back when they still trusted each other. But every time she brought it up, he had an excuse. Business expenses, networking, building his image for the brand. She wanted to believe him because believing him was easier than accepting the truth, staring her in the face. The truth was this: Derek was ashamed of her, ashamed of where she came from, ashamed of the community college on her resume, ashamed that she was the brains behind an empire everyone assumed was his alone. As the company's value climbed into the hundreds of millions, so did his need to erase her from the story. 2 weeks before the gala, he locked her out of their shared bank account. She found out standing in a grocery store checkout line, her card declined, a line of impatient strangers behind her. She had to leave her groceries on the counter and walk home in the rain. That same week, movers showed up at their house while she was out. When she came back, her office was gone. Not rearranged, gone. 6 years of research, strategy documents, and development files, boxed up and dumped into a storage unit across town, the lease already switched into her name, so it would look like she'd done it herself. He didn't even leave her a note. She sat on the floor of that empty office for a long time that night, staring at the space where her desk used to be. And here's the thing about being underestimated your whole life. Eventually you stop being angry about it, and you start being smart about it. Because Grace had done something Derek never knew about, something she never told a single soul, not even her closest friend. Every patent, every strategy document, every line of core code that made the merger worth $100 million. All of it was registered under her maiden name. Her name, not the company's name, not his name, hers. She had done it years ago, quietly, almost as a joke to herself, back when a mentor told her, "Baby, protect your work like it's your child, because nobody else will." She never imagined she'd need that protection from her own husband. Now let's fast forward to 48 hours after the divorce papers. Back to Derek, standing in a glass conference room with his lawyers, his face pale as printer paper. The offshore investors backing the $100 million merger had done something routine, something that should have been a simple formality. They asked for verification of the original intellectual property behind the company's core technology. Standard procedure. Nothing to worry about. Except when the paperwork came back, every single patent, every strategy document, every piece of code that made the company worth anything at all was registered to a woman named Grace Bell. Not to the company, not to Derek, to her. The room went cold. "This has to be a mistake," Derek said, his voice cracking in a way it never had in front of cameras. "Fix it. Call the patent office. Call someone." His lead lawyer looked at him with something close to pity. "Derek, this isn't a clerical error. She owns the intellectual property outright. Every contract we've built the merger on is worthless without her signature. Without her, there is no company to sell." The board of directors gave him an ultimatum. 48 hours to find her, 48 hours to convince her to sign over rights to the very thing he had spent years pretending was his alone, or the merger, the company, his entire empire, would collapse into nothing. He called her 17 times that first day. She didn't answer once. He drove to their old house, empty. He called old friends, family, anyone who might know where she went. Nobody did, because Grace had spent those 2 weeks doing something Derek never expected. She wasn't hiding. She was building. A rival venture capital firm, one that had been quietly watching the company's technology for over a year, had reached out to her the same week her office was packed into boxes. They didn't want Derek. They never had. They wanted whoever actually built the algorithm that made deliveries faster than anyone else in the industry. When their research team dug into the patents, they found her name on every single one. They offered her something Derek never had: respect. A seat at the table where decisions were made, not just a chair behind the man making them. 48 hours after the divorce papers were served, Derek finally found her. Not in some dark corner licking her wounds like he expected. She was standing in the lobby of a downtown high-rise, wearing a tailored navy suit, flanked by 2 senior partners from the venture capital firm, holding a leather folder with the actual merger documents inside. The documents that meant nothing without her signature. "Grace," he said, breathless, straightening his tie like it might fix anything. "We need to talk, privately." "There's nothing private left between us," she said. Her voice didn't shake, not even a little. "You made sure of that at the gala, remember? In front of 300 people." He tried charm first, then guilt. Then, when neither worked, he tried anger, hissing that she was destroying everything they built together. "We didn't build anything together," she said, stepping closer, close enough that only he could hear the next part. "I built it. You just stood in front of it and smiled for the cameras." The senior partner beside her, a sharp-eyed woman named Diane, stepped forward and placed a single document on the marble counter between them. "Mr. Vance, before this merger moves forward, our firm requires a public statement, an admission, on record, that Grace Bell was the sole architect of the technology this company was built on. Without that statement, we walk away, and so does every dollar of this deal." Derek's jaw tightened. Every instinct in him wanted to refuse, wanted to protect the image he'd spent years polishing. But refusal meant losing everything. And a man who has already lost his pride will do almost anything to keep his money. 2 days later, in front of the same board members who had given him his ultimatum, Derek stood at a podium and admitted, publicly, that the technology, the strategy, the very foundation of the company's success, belonged to Grace. His voice shook the entire time. It was the first honest thing he had said in years, and it cost him everything to say it. Then came the moment nobody in that boardroom saw coming. Diane stepped up to the same podium and cleared her throat. "Our firm isn't just acquiring this company," she said. "We're restructuring leadership entirely. Effective immediately, Grace Bell will serve as Chief Executive Officer, with full operational and voting control." The room erupted into whispers. Derek stood frozen, watching the life he tried to steal get handed, publicly, permanently, to the woman he had thrown away like old parts. Grace's first act as CEO wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, precise, and devastating in the way only quiet things can be. She stripped Derek of his voting rights within the first hour. She demoted him from founder to junior consultant, a title that meant he now had to report every expense, every decision, no matter how small, directly to her for approval. The man who once ran an empire now had to ask permission to order office supplies. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. His humiliation lived in the small things now, in the way employees who once feared him now barely acknowledged him in hallways, in the way his name badge read consultant instead of CEO, in the way every meeting he sat in now had her at the head of the table. But the story wasn't finished yet, because pride like Derek's doesn't die quietly. It was during the transition that Grace ordered a full forensic audit of the company's finances, standard practice for any new CEO taking over a business this size. What the audit found wasn't standard at all. During the divorce proceedings, in the same window of time he was locking her out of accounts and boxing up her office, Derek had been quietly moving company funds into personal shell accounts. Not thousands, millions. He hadn't just tried to erase her from the company's history. He had tried to steal from it on his way out the door. Grace sat across from him in a small glass office, the audit report between them, and for the first time since the gala, she looked at him not with anger, but with something closer to exhaustion. "You have two options," she said. "You resign quietly, today, with zero severance, and this stays between us, or I hand this report to the board and the authorities, and you can explain fraud charges to a courtroom instead of a consultant meeting." He stared at the papers for a long time. Then he signed the resignation letter without saying a single word, because there was nothing left to say. The man who once called her old parts walked out of the building he built his entire identity on, carrying a single cardboard box, the same kind he once used to erase her from her own office. Grace didn't watch him leave. She was already back at her desk, reviewing quarterly projections, because there was work to do. 6 months later, the company posted its most profitable quarter in company history. Grace stood in front of a room full of investors, no longer in the back taking notes, no longer answering questions only when someone else got stuck. She stood at the front, in a room that finally, fully, belonged to her. Someone in the crowd asked her the question everyone was thinking. How did she survive losing everything? Her marriage, her home, her name on someone else's paperwork, and come back stronger than the man who tried to erase her. She smiled, calm and certain in a way she never could have been 6 years earlier, sitting quietly behind a man who took credit for her mind. "He never took anything from me," she said. "He just showed me what I was worth, by trying to prove I was worth nothing at all." The room fell silent for a moment, then broke into applause that lasted far longer than anyone expected. Because some people spend their whole lives being underestimated, packed into boxes, locked out of what they built. And some people, when that happens, don't break. They rebuild everything, from the ground up, in their own name,